Hi everyone, I'm Aki Nakanishi. I'm the co-chief executive officer of Portland Japanese Garden, and I'll be your host for this evening's program, or this evening in Portland, Oregon. First, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for being an important part of this conversation, wherever you might be tuning in from, like I said, around the world. We are very fortunate tonight to have over 350 people signing up for this evening's program across the world. And we are excited to explore these essential concepts and ideas about Japanese gardens in the West. And before we begin, couple of housekeeping notes as well. One is about recording. Due to overwhelming requests from the audience, we have decided to record this program for later sharing on Poland Japanese Gardens YouTube channel. And we'll be announcing the timing of that release through our newsletter in the coming days. So if you haven't signed up for our e-newsletter, but would like to be kept abreast, please do so by signing up via our website. That's probably on our chat box right now. The other thing is that we'll have a dedicated Q&A segment towards the end of the program, and we'll be taking questions from the question box below at the very bottom of the screen. So please do feel free to keep your questions coming as we go along. And I'd like to share just a few words at the very top to kind of set the tone, by walking you through the impetus for this webinar, which was really twofold. First, we wanted this program to serve, in a sense, as a culminating moment for the current exhibition. That's at the garden called Designing Nature, Elements of Harmony. And since opening last September, the exhibition has been a phenomenal success, with exceptionally strong visitor feedback and a clear appetite for this type of content actually to live beyond the exhibition period. And this actually marks a first for us. It's the first time for the garden, for us actually to develop and curate an exhibition in close collaboration with our garden department, highlighting the distinctive features and design principles of our own garden right here in Portland, Oregon. So that's why we're super excited about this particular exhibition. And for those of you joining from afar who haven't had a chance to visit the exhibition or the garden in person, it might make you actually joyful to know that I'm just about to share a brief virtual walkthrough of the exhibition, which I just took literally this morning just for you. I don't know if we can pull up the video right now. Excellent. We start the journey opens with four dioramas actually representing the iconic designs from our gardens to share how garden designers employ the principles of miniaturization, that's shuke. From there, visitors encounter a large timeline wall tracing the history of Japanese gardens across roughly 1500 years, with key lineages of design and style, as well as cultural history of Japan. The exhibition also introduces the mindsets and philosophies of our own, very own gardeners, sharing their unique perspectives of how to blend in manicured trees in designed nature, while also walking us through symbolic techniques used in our own garden. This is where a lot of actually, including myself, get people get really excited. It then turns to the foundational elements of Japanese gardens, namely stone, plants, and water, and explores how these natural elements have inspired generations of artists to reprocess and reimagine nature itself. Here, we are very, very blessed to be able to juxtapose a beautiful bamboo sculpture by Chikunusai IV against the backdrop of the poetic garden. And of course, we've been so very lucky and fortunate to collaborate with a globally acclaimed artist, Hiroshi Senju, whose 13 feet wide painting is just on another level. I mean, in terms of the sense of quietness and dynamic innovation, we just couldn't get enough of this. But in the interest of time now, let's keep moving. Um, so, as many of you know, visitors return and return again and again to this exhibition, noticing something different each time, while also experiencing the garden itself in all aesthetic and technical aspects. So, we designed this webinar as a sort of capstone content because the exhibition intentionally doesn't cover the modern era, specifically speaking, the story of how Japanese gardens spread across the West. That's what we'll be focusing on together this evening. The second purpose of the program is really straightforward, actually. We just wanted to learn from one of the most astute and erudite scholars and writers on Japanese gardens in the West. And that's our keynote presenter tonight. We are also grateful to have a rare opportunity for a fireside conversation with our own garden curator, Hugo Tori, to connect those broader themes to Poland Japanese garden and to explore why this garden continues to welcome visitors from around the world, like you guys are tuning this evening from all corners of the world. And of course, I would feel remiss if I didn't mention the continuous support for all Japanese gardens in North America by something called NAJICA, North American Japanese Garden Association, of which both Ken and I proudly serve as board members. If you haven't visited their website to check them out, please do so when you have a moment. I think the URL is also provided in the small chat box below. Well, with that, it's my distinct pleasure to warmly welcome to the virtual podium Professor Kendall Brown of California State University, Long Beach. Ken, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Aki. It is really a pleasure to join you all wherever you are around the world at whatever time. As a art historian, a guest curator of exhibitions, a garden historian, and a model railroader who loves miniatures, I'm really honored to be part of this exhibition with its beautiful um, miniatures and really wonderful content. And it's also a great honor to join Aki and Hugo, for whom I have the greatest admiration. All right, with that said, I'm setting the timer on my phone because I've got 25 minutes of this presentation, which Aki asked me to talk about the modern history of Japanese gardens in the West, talking about 5 different chapters. So here we go. And the first chapter he gave me was Japonisme, this French word, let's call it Japonism, the appropriation, the deployment, the love of Japan in Europe and America from the mid-19th century on. Just any of these 5 chapters could be a seminar, graduate seminar lasting a whole academic term. So this is capsule history at its most capsule-like. At any rate, Japanese culture, including Japanese gardens, become really a dominant subject, theme, fad, infatuation in Europe, all across Europe and America from the 19th century. And often this was performances, literally staging Japan. We probably all know Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado from 1885, and I point out that it's still performed to this date, and many of the scenes are set in Japanese gardens. And so this link of Japan with gardens and in fact with women and kimono-clad women is something that one sees for the next 100 years, not to the very present, in the era of cosplay. And some of it's fantasy. Sarah Bernhardt, the great European actress, never had a Japanese garden, never went to Japan, but you're taking popular things, Japan, Japanese gardens, Western actresses, and putting them all together. Next, please. Next slide. Yes, there we are. So, and this spreads from Europe, from Britain, Europe to America. And American author John Luther Long writes the story Madame Butterfly in 1898. It becomes a novel. It becomes a play in 1900. It's Puccini's opera in 1906. It's a movie. Well, many times over, it's a movie, but the most famous version was in fact filmed in an American garden that I'll show you later in Plainfield, New Jersey in 1915, before Hollywood moved to Hollywood. And so this idea of women in garden and building actual Japanese gardens, the fantasy becomes manifest as gardens are built. Even there's a movie theater in New York City, opens in 1918 called the Japanese Gardens Theater. I show a slide of it at the bottom left here. So this love of Japan, the fantasy of Japan, the construction of Japan, the stage Japan, and gardens in particular. And for us garden historians, this is clearly an important early step. Next slide. Next, we'll move it along. I am not able to. Oh, there we are. And just to sort of culminate this stage Japan, I mean, I recently, one back, please. I recently curated an exhibition of Japanese sheet music, but in fact, there's a whole genre of Western sheet music and popular song. You know, when you sing a song, you're internalizing the values, and part of this love of Japan and Japanese gardens is seen in the song. It all comes together in the song "In a Japanese Garden" from 1928. Japanese garden themed restaurant and supper club, the Palais Royal from 1921 in New York City, or in Atlantic City, where my grandparents met in 1918 on the boardwalk. We've probably most of us played Monopoly, and when you put your token on the boardwalk from 1896 to about 1900, there was a 6-acre Japanese tea garden, so called, but a really lavish garden where a Japanese entrepreneur, Yumindo or Yumeto Kushibiki, staged Japanese tea ceremony and roosters and all sorts of attractions in a garden. Next. The second chapter that Aki gave me to talk about, next slide, please, was World's Fairs, because World's Fairs are how Japanese gardens really became first best known in America. And importantly, these were primarily built by the Japanese government using plants sent from Japan and sometimes even stones, in a few cases, lanterns, built by Japanese artisans across Europe and North America. So they're authorized. The appropriation, the historical kind of taking different historical styles and blending them together into something called a Japanese garden, writ large as a microcosm standing for a little bit of Japan. This starts with the 1873 World's Fair in Vienna. First comes to America in 1876, the Philadelphia Centennial, and then these World's Fairs, large and small, spread out across America. In a few cases, the Japanese government did not participate, and so San Francisco G.T. Marsh California Midwinter Fair 1894, it was a local entrepreneur who built the Japanese garden. There was a protest by the Japanese government and Japanese business interests, and the second Japanese garden was built by them. So Japanese gardens, even sites of contestation. Who represents Japan? Who speaks for Japan from the very early period? Next slide, please. So these World's Fairs were created primarily by the Japanese government. There was a large imperial Japanese garden. But in addition, as you see on the left and the right at places like the Lewis and Clark Exposition in Portland, 1905, Alaska Yukon Pacific, 1909 in Seattle, where Japan was one of the main exhibitors, there were also commercial tea gardens. So there's both this sort of authorized imperial grand landscape and then the more commercial kind of self-exoticizing landscape. So we even have multiple Japans or interpretations at these World's Fairs. This is St. Louis, the second time a Ferris wheel was ever employed. This was right during the Russo-Japanese War, and when the Russians pulled out of exhibiting at the St. Louis World's Fair, Japan rented all of the property abandoned by the Russian government, really showing how they saw these World's Fairs as a keen opportunity to express their culture and their ideas and really gain adherence. And it was largely successful. This is a quote from a magazine, a kind of progressive magazine called The World's Work. And Isaac Marcuson, the writer, kind of says exactly, I think, what the Japanese government wanted. You know, in this arrangement, the National Pavilion shows that in addition to the achievements in commerce and industry, and you would have seen Japanese displays in the halls of industry and commerce and so on, we see the perfection of landscape beauty, the genius of a people who, in the art of war, the Russo-Japanese War is taking place, and in the pursuit of peace, symbolized by gardens, they are making their way to a place in world power. Very much the message. Next slide, please. Message continues right up to the World War II. In fact, during Japanese invasion of Manchuria and then North China, Japan is participating at World's Fairs. San Francisco oh, sorry, we'll get there in a minute, but 1915, just to point out the scale. I got a little ahead of myself. The scale, this is San Francisco 1915, and many of these buildings and plants. On the upper right, there's a circle. There is a bonsai that is still that was right in the middle of that circle that is still survives to this day. And you can check out the Domoto Nursery site to hear about the history of this plant. At any rate, World's Fairs really brought Japanese architecture and gardens to America in a massive scale, and they received huge publicity in newspapers and magazines. Millions of people saw them in person, and tens of millions read about them and were impressed through secondary media. Next, please. As I was saying a moment ago, this Japanese government desire to use gardens and traditional architecture hand in hand, and images of women, you'll note in the advertisement at the upper right there by the Japanese government. This is New York World's Fair in 1939, San Francisco International Exposition 1939-40. That we see this desire, even at this time of the brink of World War and Japan's Greater East Asia War well underway, this desire to present Japan, and it's a little hard to read, but the text reads, changeless, timeless Japan. Its enduring charm takes place naturally in the world of tomorrow, which was the futuristic theme of the World's Fair in New York. Okay, next slide. It brings us to chapter 3. In what Aki asked me to talk about, which was, from these World's Fairs, what happens next? Well, they were so popular. They were almost always the most visited, highest income producing part of the World's Fairs that entrepreneurs, both Japanese immigrant and Anglo-European, built commercial tea gardens, which were in virtually every part of America. No town is too small really to have one. Tend to be very kind of predominant on both coasts, but they're coast to coast. There's one patron, Noda, and a carpenter named Honda in Monterey, Pacific Grove. George Turner Marsh, an Australian antique dealer in San Francisco, he built the garden at the 1894 San Francisco World's Fair, and then he built a chain of tea gardens from San Diego, 1903, to Pasadena, 1903 also. Golden Park, he ran that after the World's Fair, and about 5 or 6 others. Next slide, please. And just one kind of surprising example is that these commercial tea gardens there were 4 of them in New York City on rooftops by the 1920s. In fact, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel had on its, I think, the 19th floor, the top floor, it had a large restaurant and commercial tea garden, which was the place to go. As the advertisement on the upper right, or the New Yorker cartoon shows, that this was, or even a newspaper photo from the Rockford, Illinois Register Gazette. Why go abroad when you can go to this tea garden and experience from the World's Fairs to these small, kind of very much exoticized ones, become stand-ins. The staging of Japan continues through tea gardens. Even F. Scott Fitzgerald in his first novel, This Side of Paradise, says, I've got a dilemma. I need to sit in my room and write if I'm going to be a writer, but I need to live. And what is living? Living is going to the Japanese at the Ritz. Next, please. Being a real New Yorker out there. So this great vogue for Japanese gardens at World's Fairs, at tea gardens, and movie theaters comes home, quite literally. Elites, the Rockefellers and others coast to coast, want to have Japanese gardens. Often these are added to very European-style houses. So it's a sort of exotic, maybe palate cleanser to the European formal gardens, the European architecture, the great European art that is collected. And in fact, the Huntington Estate here in San Marino in Southern California, where I am, was the old G.T. Marsh commercial tea garden, which goes out of business, and Henry Huntington has it moved lock, stock, and barrel, including the gardeners, the Japanese first-generation family who took care of it, to his estate. Japanese in America also built gardens. This is the famous Dr. Jokichi Takamine, who was a very famous science entrepreneur. And the Japanese government sold him part of the St. Louis World's Fair, and he moved it to his country home in upstate New York. So next slide, please. This is when I showed you that slide earlier of the movie Madame Butterfly with Mary Pickford. It was filmed at the estate of Charles Pfizer Jr. This is Pfizer Pharmaceutical, named Yadamos, which is the word someday backwards, the sort of fancy someday, never, never land. And it was about a 16-acre Japanese garden, published in Country Life in America. So just the scale of these, it really is kind of Japan recreated. Four acres, I said 16, 4 acres, $75,000. Ueda and Takahashi, the gardener and the carpenter, also worked on the Rockefeller estate. Next, please. And it wasn't just the elites, the Rockefellers and others, that the vogue for Japanese gardens, something you wanted to live with. And maybe this is a theme will come up later. The seed is planted here. There's a book, Eugene Merman, California Gardens, on new styles for everyday middle-class gardens. And there's about 50 different garden styles suggested. 5 of them are types of Japanese residential gardens that are just going to fit in your backyard, between your bungalow-style home and your garage. Almost none of these survive, but bungalow courts and bungalow Japanese gardens were very much for the middle class as well as for the elite. Next, please. And as I think this next slide shows, yes, Japanese Americans who had sufficient wealth to build gardens, built Japanese gardens. One of the grandsons who shows up in one of these photos told me that it was a kind of status symbol published in these Japanese American newspapers and yearbooks. Of course, it was also a way of putting down roots. You've moved from one country to another. You're going to take the land of your parents and grandparents and transplant something of it into your life here in America for your children and grandchildren. It's also a kind of sense of community. On the left, this is the Fukunaga Garden. Fukunaga were a large Japanese produce industry in Los Angeles, and their garden was the site where the Nisei Week, the second generation Nisei Week princesses, would always have their photos taken on the bridge in the backyard before. And even during the time of incarceration, when Japanese Americans were forcefully removed from their residences in Washington, Oregon, and California, about half of the 10 incarceration camps featured gardens. Manzanar has a wealth of gardens, 60, 70, 80 park gardens like Merritt Park you see in the central bottom, residential gardens at barracks outside mess halls. So throughout the war, Japanese gardens are built and high quality. Next, please. The Japanese American experience extended from being the patron of gardens. Next, please. To, of course, the builders of gardens. And there were a few major gardens. There's a book by Beth Cody on Kiar Otsuka, Japanese landscape artist in the American Midwest, which shows the remarkable work for people of all levels of economic, well, upper and middle levels of economic ability. And so there were some major figures building gardens across the country, and then a lot of regional garden builders. I show photos of Kinzuki Fuji in Southern California, Frank Yamamoto in Northern California. And this was, of course, a kind of economic necessity, but it was a great pride. And these Issei men often worked at a variety of professions before finding their way into garden work. And the photos, the sense of their, looking back at the camera, the pride in I've had the great pleasure of being with their children and grandchildren in the gardens that their parents and grandparents built, in that lasting sense of legacy. And certainly these Issei garden builders are very aware that they are building a bridge between Japan, the land where they came from, to America, the land where they and their children and grandchildren will live and put down roots. Next. An important and often overlooked feature of the Japanese American a contribution to gardens, and more than gardens, it's just the whole landscape of the United States, especially the Western United States, is the role of nurseries. Domoto Brothers in Hayward, Oakland, San Gabriel Nursery in Southern California, which importantly during the post-war period started an agricultural exchange program with Tokyo University of Agriculture. So they are bringing over Japanese workers, Japanese plants, making hybrids, selling these. I once estimated that going into my local Costco and Lowe's, about 40% of the plants, sort of everyday garden plants, are either Sinensis or Japonica species, plants that come from East Asia. So our North American landscape palette is immeasurably enriched by Japanese plants brought by Japanese nurserymen and horticulturalists. In addition, for gardens, you could of course bought seeds from companies like the Yokohama Nursery Company, but both Japanese antique dealers Yamanaka and Company and A.A. Van Teen in New York, in addition to selling Japanese art, including to top museums and collectors, they had whole garden departments. They're selling plants, they're selling lanterns, and you can gauge from this business, here are the providers for every aspect of a Japanese garden. Next. All right. The fourth chapter, I believe, that Aki gave me to talk about in 25 minutes, 6 minutes left, was the post-war and abstraction. So after World War II, as John Dower, the great historian, called it, the war without mercy between Japan and America, friendship returns relatively quickly, and Japanese gardens do too. In fact, 1949, the Modern Living magazine and House Beautiful award-winning Pacesetter House was a Japanese-themed garden called the Garden of 100 Stones, built by a Harvard-trained landscape architect named Ethelbert Furlong. Furlong was influenced by teachers Christopher Tennard and then his classmate Garrett Ekbo, who had written about Japanese gardens, praised them. Ekbo famously writes in his book Landscape for Living, Japanese gardens are probably the most highly refined and completely developed garden conception world culture has known. Why? Not for their representing Japan, not for their architecture, but for their sensitive expression of the specific nature of material. So for Ekbo and these modernists, you're looking at the asymmetry of design, you're looking at the power of stone, you're looking at the composition. So it's a new kind of revolutionary approach, which is the conceptual and the functional approach. Next slide. And basically, these gardens are really going to make our lives better. They're landscapes for healthy living. And so there's new books. David Engel, who went to Japan on an early Fulbright grant, wrote the book Japanese Gardens for Today, where he shows the famous Zen garden at Ryoanji in a print by Saito Kiyoshi. And so this interest in Zen coming out of D.T. Suzuki and the popularization of Zen beach culture, and now even the Rockefellers, whose original 1910 garden is seen in the lower left, they add more modern, kind of modern style ski Japanese tea house architecture by Yoshimoto Junzo, and then David Engel builds a kind of modern Zen style garden. So this is the page is being turned. Next slide, please. And on the left, because in case you're at a cocktail party and as somebody asks you, as they tend to, when was the first Zen garden built in America, the first dry landscape? Actually, it was the New Orleans Public Library in 1958. On the second floor, Kyoto garden maker Sano Toemon builds that in 1958. Brooklyn Botanic Garden, which is one of those early civic gardens, they needed something new in the 1950s, not your father's old red bridge and cherry blossoms, but a dry garden. Next slide. And so Takuma Tono, who in fact designs the Portland Garden, when he's hired by Portland, he had been working in Brooklyn. He was hired by George Avery, the director, and we don't want old thing, we want modern art. We want abstraction. And this is the actual pamphlet, the original pamphlet. It's an abstract garden and it's non-representational. It's an abstract picture. On the left, this is another quote from that original pamphlet. It's why it's like trying to compare this Ryoanji replica to something else is like comparing abstract painting with traditional art or contemporary symphonic music, Schoenberg with some old romantic symphony. Next slide, please. It's about harmony. Harmony underlies the universe. Abstraction is international. It can be Japanese, but it can go around the world and be universal. So this new desire to have abstraction can become almost purely aesthetic. Isamu Noguchi's garden at the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York City. It's still there. I encourage you to see it if you haven't. He calls it Mai Ryoanji. So sometimes it's just aesthetic. And I think for Noguchi, and I know Aki is a Noguchi fan, it was also a desire to introduce Japanese culture into mainstream modern Americanism, modern American art. American culture isn't anymore coming unidirectionally across the Atlantic from Europe. It's also coming across the Pacific. And so that's a key kind of political, cultural message as well as the aesthetic one. Also, there's a desire with these dry gardens is to see them as sort of therapeutic. In fact, this is one at the Golden Door Spa in San Diego. And during a special inner door session, guests pay extra because they can rake it as part of mindfulness and meditation. And supposedly I heard that Nelson Rockefeller raked the dry garden at the Rockefeller estate after he lost the 1964 Republican primaries. Next slide, please. He raked it because it was a way of centering his mind. And the fifth and final chapter that Aki gave me in the last minute is to bring us right to Portland into the modern era, Pride and Peace Civic Gardens in the post-war period. And the Portland Japanese Garden is a great example. Next slide, please. And as most of you know, this is a kind of a new style. It's a sampler garden. There's dry garden called Zen gardens. And go back one, please. And, the tea gardens and pond gardens, waterfall gardens. So it's it's the sampler plate. And in fact, this is a style that started in the Pacific Northwest. There we are in Seattle in 1960. And these are about friendship. This is coming right out of Cold War, sister city, person-to-person diplomacy under the Eisenhower administration, 1957, and where our German former enemies, now allies, are giving us statues of bears and things like that. Japan is making a much more significant contribution by building new gardens which tend to be in more naturalistic styles. So this is the old City Beautiful movement meets kind of international pride in the post-war period. Next slide. And most of these gardens, as you all know from Portland, but these are found across North America, it features your kind of familiar bridges, sometimes even bronze cranes. It features tea houses and pavilions, and it also features dry gardens. So it's taking us through the whole range of Japanese garden history. And I think that is all for me. So thank you.
Wow. You just gotta say. Oh my God, you're just dancing through that amazing tour de force. I mean, I don't really use this expression often, but tour de force of presentation, just walking us through the entire mechanics of the propagation of Japanese garden across not just North America, but across entire West. Thank you so very much for that. Oh my God. Yeah. So much to unpack. And of course, we want to invite our own garden curator, Hugo Tori here to join the conversation. Hi, Hugo. Good
Hello,
to see
Aki and
you.
Ken. Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Yeah. And well, you're still probably at the garden, right? As we speak.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, being mindful of our time here, but yeah, to kind of kickstart this conversation between the three of us, I want to definitely start with you, Hugo, as you come on there. Your general kind of take on that incredibly content-rich,
Right. That was a lot.
fast-paced,
I'm really blown
all-encompassing.
away. Yeah.
Yeah, it was yeah, mind-blowing to say the
And
least.
I did it in 25 minutes, which is
Yeah,
what I
Right.
my God, yeah, honestly, you get the first
Yeah.
prize for that. This is truly the collector's edition. I'm so glad we are recording this as well, actually. So is everyone else probably in the virtual auditorium. But yeah, Hugo, you want to kind of kick
Right.
off our, conversation by outlining your general take on that
Mhm.
amazing presentation that we just experienced.
Right. So yeah, there was a lot of things that I wanted to say during the watching the slide, but altogether now I'm just fighting out. But
Mm,
the uh, the variations in the types of reason why gardens are built, it's such a wide range. If gardens are built to meet the demands and in the supply and demand form, there are so many different type of demands, and which sort of let me think about the type of demands we're facing now,
mm,
as much as the demands that were existing at the time of creation.
mm,
Um, and each one of them, which may have a maybe existing to this day, will have its own demand at the time today. So um,
mm,
that was a lot to think about. And each of the slides, I want to slow down and look at it carefully. Very
mhm,
informative and
mhm.
very resourceful for my job.
Oh my God, yeah. That's why I can't stop smiling right now, honestly. Just being able to keep going back to that video, the specific moment in that video presentation. Yeah, each slide actually
Mm,
deserves an entire lecture. So
mm,
yeah, again, that's just hats off to Ken's amazing ability to also deliver with such passion and enthusiasm, right? But Ken, to that point though, I want to kind of try to break it down little by little so that we don't lose people. That's also an important aspect of this webinar, right? So early in your presentation, Ken, you showed how images of Japan were sort of performed or, for Western audiences, it was kind of staged, right, through theater and popular culture. When Japanese gardens became part of that same staging, I wonder what durable expectations did it set about Japanese gardens should be, what a Japanese garden should be, and what assumptions, if any, are we still carrying with us today? I just wonder if we are still sort of indoctrinated, from that era, or have we grown out of it?
That's an excellent question. And it reminds me my professors used to always quote Louis, the best question is better than the best answer. And so I ask the audience to think, don't just wait. What is Ken Brown going to say? Think about these yourself, because I
Mm.
have no monopoly on the best answer. At any rate, lasting expectations, I think they did set. And when I see people doing costume play, cosplay in gardens, I think that we've barely changed at all, but things keep going around. So the Japanese gardens abroad were from the very period seen as stated for Japanese culture and cultural activities. And of course, historically in Japan, I think of shinden, zukuri, sleeping hall style aristocratic villas with gardens in the Heian period, 10th, 11th, 12th century. And they used their gardens for parties, for rituals, for social events. Um, but if a Japanese garden outside Japan is seen as a kind of microcosm of Japan, transplanted, something we
Mm.
saw at World's Fairs, then it makes sense to have Japanese events there. And that's probably a good thing. My own university Japanese garden at Cal State Long Beach has cherry blossom viewing Children's Day, Tanabata, Chrysanthemum Day, Obon. But the problem, I think, the second part of your question is the gardens become less a living thing and they become more a kind of a museum piece or even, as you suggested, a stage set. And this continues in Japan to the present, especially with nighttime light ups and Japanese history lessons in a local garden, but it's not about the garden. People don't see the garden as a physical space. They don't really see it. They don't feel it. They don't hear it. It becomes the kind of symbol representation of natural culture. And the Japanese garden, I can do any Japanese thing in it. I tend to want people to do cultural activities, Japanese based or otherwise, but activities that resonate with the garden itself.
Mm.
You're matching your activity. So I'm more for shakuhachi music than taiko. In the garden, more for oboe and lanterns than kabuki drama in a Japanese garden.
Mm,
Mhm.
mm, mm. Yeah, I guess
To kind of answer your question with something proactive.
answers many of my questions there, but also raises a lot other questions as well, for us to kind of keep pondering as well, right? Yeah, over to you, Hugo. When, you situate Portland Japanese Garden, you represent Portland Japanese Garden in this webinar. And I wonder, in that broader universe of Japanese style gardens across North America, what um feels most distinctive about our role right now? And where do you feel the toughest kind of push and pull between public expectations and true craft? You talked about changing public taste and everything. We need to keep catering to the changing public demands as well, right? So I just
Right,
wonder, from the garden curator's point of view, how you stay on top of it.
right. It's similar to what I just said previously, but it's understanding the demand of the garden, and I think it's the continuing effort is what I want to show. It has been continue to keep looking nice.
Mm,
And I'm here just for a short time compared to the 60-year history. I think it's important that it's just passed down to me, and then I'm going to be passing over to someone else. Uh, but understanding also that there are changes needed to be done because the demand is changing. And that becomes the challenging part of meeting the public expectation. It's, when we have a bigger visitation, it's very different how we will be presenting the garden. If we have different types of audience, that also will be different. So gardens can be an amusement, recreational, can also be a healing place and can transform into many different kind of experiences.
I think following up on little, often they were designed more for looking, but I
mm,
think the transition is, sort of redesigning or adapting for kind of doing.
mm, mm,
You know,
mm.
to,
That's also a very profound point. Yeah, we can keep digging too, actually. But also going back to an important segment within your presentation, how you can, in the section that talked about World's fairs, suggesting these gardens were more than just beauty, but they were also a form of national messaging. It kind of tells me, all the talks about cultural appropriation and all that kind of stuff was actually, in a way, produced and manufactured by the Japan side as well. So, in retrospect, what do you think, Japan actually wanted Western visitors to take away, both emotionally or intellectually? And how did that influence the gardens that followed in North America? Is my kind of very broadly set question for you.
that's another very good question. I think it's not just the World's Fair, that it continues with the kind of difference into the post-war, the Cold War sister city gardens, which are also built from the Japanese side.
Hmm.
But it's a different Japan that's being shown. And of course, at the World's Fairs, you go and see the Hall of Technology and Industry, where Japan is showing off its what I often call the three M's. It's modern, mechanical, masculine side, and the garden is the alternate side. It's the yan, yin to the yang. The soft, feminine, traditional, changeless, timeless. To use that terminology from the next slide, the New York World's Fair. But I think what that leaves out is, uh, you know, it's a nice transition from national advertising to friendship. I think back to that song, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? Nothing. That this message, especially in the post-war friendship garden, is a very positive thing, but it sort of leaves out the garden as a place to do things, to work in. It's still the garden is symbol. So, we're staging Japan, whether it's Western fantasy or Japan kind of cultural power, but Japan is still being staged. The garden is still a symbol. And I think it's the transition to this kind of contemporary moment from the 1990s on, as Professor Makoto Suzuki has seen the third phase from World's Fairs to Sister City to is the garden less as a stage or a symbol, but more as a kind of microcosm, not of Japan, but as a Japanese approach to working with landscape. It's the working with, it's Hugo and his team being in the garden and doing it that's as much a part of the garden as the physical things, the peace lanterns and the Sister City bells and so forth.
Mm, mm. My God, yeah, yeah. Promise me to do another lecture on that specific topic again. Okay, we're gonna have to come back to that point as well. But want to also ask another kind of burning question from me to Hugo. You know, as we were also talking about changing tastes and evolving, ever-changing kind of a landscape from the point of audience, and also which audience are we talking about? And you know, even in Japan, traditions adapt to meet new contexts as well. So, what are the essential elements of Japanese garden that should really remain non-negotiable regardless of era to you? I mean, I know it's a difficult one, but if you can just impart, I don't know, two or three different concepts, that'd be amazing.
Yes, very difficult question. Um, to identify the 本質, the true
Mm,
essence of Japanese garden, while appropriate skill and knowledge is, of course, needed, understanding, I think, Japan's natural beauty and the
mm,
Japanese sense of beauty can be a very big part. Um, the word 不易流行 is, I think, often used when talking about this. It's something immutable versus something that's more trend or fashionable.
mm,
Uh, what's the difference? Like, when does a new genre of music become a classic? Uh,
mm, mm,
uh, I think understanding the tradition, being first innovative is, I think, first step to understanding what is in its essence, like the original reasons
mm.
of how it developed. But another way I look at it, I always do feel is that purity is so important. Uh,
Oh,
um, Pure love for the garden, genuineness helps to develop the Japanese gardens as Japanese gardens.
brilliant. Yeah. I'm sure all of the gardeners in your department are keenly watching right now. Yeah. Again, over to Ken from me, because I want to also definitely touch on the Japanese Americans, you know, Japanese American experience in this country. And you kind of painted a picture where Japanese Americans as kind of patrons, nursery owners and landscape professionals, right? Including gardens created in those camps too. I mean, very, very powerful images. Because we also did a photography exhibition a few years back, actually, featuring photography by Ansel Adams, Dorothea Lane, and Toyo Miyatake. And I guess, you know, my question to you, Ken, is what is the single most sort of overlooked dimension of that history in mainstream narratives? And what are authentic ways for institutions to honor it beyond, you know, symbolic recognition? Because we always want to be mindful of where to draw those lines. So, yeah, if you can sort of share your thoughts on this one, that'd be appreciated.
A plaque or a paragraph on a website is a good start, but it's I think it's not nearly enough. Hugo talked about the purity of Japanese gardens, and it reminded me that a Kyoto architect once said to me, "If it's clean, it's not a Japanese garden," which is maybe is good. That sense of care and
Hmm.
profound care, pure care. But as a historian, I think history should not be too clean. It should be a little dirty. It should be complex. That's my
Hmm.
metaphor. Dirty is complex. And I think often mainstream garden history, as seen in docent tours, and docent tours are how the public hears the garden's kind of story. It tends to treat modern 20th century Japanese gardens in America as if we were in 16th century Japan. So,
Mm,
we jump over the people who built it and rebuilt it. We jump over the gardeners like Hugo. We jump over the JACL, Japanese American Citizens League, who pushed for the garden. We jump over a lot of things, and a lot of what we jump over is Japanese American, Issei, Nisei, Sansei experience. And so if we're going to put Japanese gardens in the quilt of American culture, that we
mm,
definitely, that's where we put Japanese Americans into them because they're such an integral part for most gardens. And so I think
mm,
docent tours, making them dirty, messy possible ways. We take
mm.
away, it's just like Kyoto in the 16th century. And no, no, it really isn't. In some ways, yes, it is. But in other ways, there's this whole other layer that needs the shout. And I think it makes
Mm.
it richer. As I often tell people when they're like anxious when I say this, you're not losing a daughter, you're gaining a son-in-law. You can still have the Japanese garden essence, and then you get this complex modern history as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it brings a lot of things home, actually, for me, as a father of two daughters as well. So it definitely resonates with me in many ways. Hugo, in your work as garden curator, you have to train American gardeners, and
Mm.
there are so many different contextual layers of understanding of what you're trying to teach. What are
Mhm.
you most sort of determined to pass on, and that cannot be really absorbed from books, images, short visit to some pretty Japanese garden out there. How would you define success for a gardener, 5 or 10 years down the road in their own kind of regional context? I just wonder
Mm.
what you value the most in your own training of American gardeners here.
Right. Yes, I do a lot of training for my gardeners, and oftentimes maybe something that has been repeated the most is talking about harmony.
Mm,
Um, Many of the times, it's sometimes too good. It's too good that it stands out from the rest,
mm,
but it's made, the culture has been so that they compete and you have to win and be outstanding from others. So I understand the appeal that it's done better than the other areas, but when you look from afar, it's not harmonizing. So it may mean that you have to let go a little bit of perfecting it. But
mm,
like Brown says, like a little bit messy is a little better. But understanding how it should be clean and tidy and perfect, but also understanding how it should be in harmony with others. And
mm,
the other part was like 5 or 10 years later, what can be a success. Um, I think if you're able to create a garden that you can enjoy with and share with others, that
mm,
is one success. And if you're making a garden for yourself, if you're nurtured by that garden that you've creating it, it's
mm.
another success.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much. That has, yeah, a lot of hidden and layered meaning there, I can see. So, yeah. Again, I'm really glad this has been archived for posterity and for later learning for all of us. That's fantastic. Yeah, we want to be also mindful about time, trying to make sure there's enough time for audience members to ask questions. But I just want to, I don't know, slip in a couple of more questions if I may. Can, you trace a shift from this, I love this word, exoticism, exotic associations to post-war abstraction and a more universal modern language. And today, many visitors seek, mindfulness and well-being. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, at what point does that evolution, from the exoticism to a new interpretation of Japanese garden or new use of Japanese garden, at what point does that evolution become a genuine bridge between cultured, and when does it risk reducing the garden to a kind of just a, I don't know, mere atmosphere or aesthetic background for photo shoot?
Hmm. Yeah, that's another really requested in the books, so to speak, is a post-war insight
Mm,
of that generation in the 50s to see Japanese gardens as more about the forms and the experience. In David
mm,
Engel's book, Richard Neutra, Architects, talks about the health-giving properties of Japanese gardens. He's writing about that in the 30s as a modernist. And so
mm,
that is a critical bridge to the current focus on Japanese gardens, universal design style and philosophy conducive to fostering physical and kind of emotional wellness. But I've heard some people say, well, first, I think that takes us back because historically in Japan, some aristocrat in the 10th century or warlord in the 16th century didn't see his garden as being Japanese. It was just a garden. It was an up-to-date garden, but it did something. Back to Hugo's original point of, what's the demand? What do you want it for? So this kind of modern evolution, post-war insight is sort of, I think, to go back to that, the power of the rocks, the stones, the design, the seasons. I've heard some people say in our field, well, we should take the name Japanese out. Like classical garden style, like European Baroque music has become classical university, the Loki method. I think that approach would flatten it, to use your word, Aki, and by
mm,
which I mean kind of diminish them, because part of the appeal and
mm,
the power of a Japanese garden from old styles that innovating within tradition, is that they're still partially about going somewhere else.
mm,
Even in modern
mm,
Japan, the Nihon Teien, the Japanese garden, is like a trip to a foreign country's past. And
mhm.
that's important. It takes us, when we're challenged to go to another culture in another time, it takes us out of our comfort zone. And that's a good thing. We question out our values and our assumptions. And that difference, that sense of distance from the familiar, adds value, I think. You want to go so far it becomes exotic, but we don't want to flatten it out. It just becomes a pretty landscape. So keeping Japanese gardens as microcosms of idealized nature informed by Japanese cultural values, to me, is the right kind of balance.
Mm. Beautifully said. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, again, I want to be mindful of time, and I want to just get to maybe a couple of questions from the question box here. Looking at a question from someone called Darcy. I see Nitobe Garden Saga 1960 in Vancouver, BC was included in Professor Brown's last slide, International Friendship Period. Did they also proliferate in Mexico, especially and/or South America in general, Brazil, for example? Questions for you, Ken. And
Yes, not Mexico so much, but in
mm,
South America was so much Japanese immigration in Brazil.
hmm
And yes, Japanese gardens have proliferated. There's the largest public one is in Buenos Aires, and it's a real center of the city. So this is not just a North American thing. It's also a South American thing. And to a degree, it's universal. There were Maharajas in India built Japanese gardens in the 30s.
That's
This,
right.
for Japanese culture, Nikkei gene, Japanese heritage people, wherever they went, a garden was a way to literally and symbolically put down roots and contribute positively to the larger culture they were joining.
Mm.
Excellent question.
Brilliant. Yeah, someone called Steven is trying to connect the gift of cherry trees from Japan to for example Washington D.C. the basin. Is there a specific connection between the propagation of Japanese gardens throughout North America and the gifts of those trees from Japan?
That's the 19 teens, which you mentioned earlier, the Nazca Journal 1 or 2 had a wonderful article by Sada Uchiyama, Hugo's predecessor, about that whole gift.
Mm,
That was part of it. It wasn't kind of instigating it. It was part of this larger kind of horticultural diplomacy.
hmm Horticultural diplomacy, yeah, of
And in
which
fact,
way.
Hoichi Kurisu, who was your first or your second garden curator,
hmm
built a nice memorial plaque at about 10 years ago at the cherry blossoms there on the tidal basin.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, yeah, more to yeah, comment on that front, but again, definitely keeping the time management on track. Want to ask you a very quick question to Hugo. Poland Japanese Garden has been building deeper partnerships, right, with leading gardens across Japan, not just
Mhm.
across North America, but do what do you most hope we will move in both directions? Knowledge, people, shared problem solving, or values. Why do these relationships matter, especially now? Is my final question to you, Hugo.
Yeah, I think no, I hope everything you said flows in both directions, but especially people,
Mm,
because people see things different, feel things different, and express things different. And that's what's so amazing when people meet people. I do a live stream gardener seminar in within my department, but rather than them talking about the garden, I want them to be talking about everything else uh,
mm,
to feel what indirectly will affect them to making a better garden.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, so audience members are now just getting their ball rolling in terms of like throwing in all these questions. Yeah, I want to also leave some time for your final comments and thoughts from each of the panel members here. But yeah, maybe I should just pick one question right from Australia down under. So many questions, he says, Richard. I build and tend and I grow my Japanese garden as a manifestation of order and life narrative. On that note, please address hybridization, for instance. I am Australian. We have some beautiful native plants like bonxias that can have the same elegant architecture for as pines. How do you think about adapting native plants to Japanese garden concepts? Maybe, yeah, to you, Hugo.
Yes, it's same what we do here as well. We don't use all Japanese native plants,
Mm,
um, but it is in our understanding of Japanese garden to follow the order of nature. So
mm,
understanding natural vegetation, plant community and group, and applying that, extracting the most beautiful part of it, and then
mm.
bringing it in the garden is the Japanese way, Japanese garden way.
So using the platform, but the thing that resonates with the local climate, the topography, everything else, the best.
Mhm.
So yeah, adaptability is also another key word here, I guess. Well, with that though, I want to make sure, Hugo, you might want to go first in terms of sharing your last parting comments and thoughts in terms of what we've talked about, so many different layers.
Right. So we went through so much,
I
and
know.
I'm trying to figure out how I can continue to do the best maintenance with the garden is really for me a lot has to do with the training my gardeners
Mm, mm,
and learning from each other. Actually, it's not one way. And it's such a global world now that there's uh, so much of that need now to cross culture and learn from one another because it's also so fast paced that we have to learn fast pace. And that's in the hope of me that I can continue to do that here.
and I'm just profoundly proud to be working alongside you. Thank you so much, Hugo.
Thank you.
Ken, any final thoughts, comments?
Yeah, two things to embarrass Hugo and say that in my 35 years in the field, the fact that there are people like Aki and Hugo with their breadth of transnational experience in the field and as leaders in the field is really to show that we in the Japanese garden world internationally are in a pretty good place. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish or Pangloss if you like Voltaire. It's not all glittery. There's certainly problems, but that we've come a long way pretty quickly the last 25 years or so. And just when I started visiting Japanese gardens in Japan and North America, around the world. At first, I just took pictures of the gardens in their most Japanese cultural aspects, lanterns and architecture, as a Japanese art historian. And then I had to become interested in the design and the plants. And now I take photos of people enjoying the gardens and the gardeners working in them. And I think that evolution in approach through my own nose is in many ways parallels where we are as a field. The gardens are about people and bringing together people into connection with nature, this idealized nature, and that brings us into connection with, I think, the angels of our own better nature, to our best selves. And when we're in that place, then we connect with other people more positively. So that's kind of grandiose and very positive, but for me, that's my conclusion.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, it just means immensely to all of us actually in the industry coming from some gigantic figure such as yourself. I mean, we do stand on the shoulders of those giants, and you are certainly one of them. And as we, come to a close, I want to also just a quick another housekeeping note. Actually, there's going to be a very quick survey at the end of this program when we turn this down. Actually, if you can spend a few moments answering those questions, it's going to help us improve those programs going forward. So I really would appreciate just a little bit more of your time after we close this one. But I want to offer my sincere thank you to Professor Ken Brown for such an illuminating presentation. And to, of course, garden creator Hugo Torre for helping bring these ideas back home, actually, to Poland Japanese garden through your lived practice and incredible stewardship. Tonight's conversation really reminded us that Japanese gardens in North America, or in the West for that matter, have never been static objects, I guess. They've been evolving cultural spaces shaped by things like history, migration, craft, and for sure, changing public needs and tastes. And perhaps most importantly, for me anyway, they continue to offer a place where people can slow down and notice and reconnect with not just nature, but also with one another and with something that's larger than ourselves. And I think those things were really reflected in some of the comments and questions put forth by our global audience members tonight. We also think that gardens all offer a forum of like dynamic conversation as well for our social issues that we are going through. And we've covered a lot of aspects of Japanese gardens in the West across time and space tonight. And I feel like it answered a lot of questions, but again, we have many more questions to actually, to think about going forward. And to that end, if you haven't visited the garden to see the exhibition for yourself, please do consider visiting. And better still, consider becoming a member as well. Because after all, it's each and every one of you who makes these programs possible and enables us to keep cultivating our garden and sharing the joy, serenity, and of course, inspiration that the garden brings. So, on behalf of all of us in Portland Japanese Garden, thank you so much for spending time with us and for joining from across the continent and around the world. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. ありがとうございました。